It all starts with the tools at your fingertips. CMI creates workplaces full of inspiring leaders. With its on-demand resources, network of mentors and industry-leading accreditations. Search CMI Confidence today.
This session is recorded and will be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. Join the conversation by using the live chat box for your questions and comments. We'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Managing Yourself Leadership Lessons from Horses and Sports digital event. My name is Craig Greendale, and I'm the events coordinator here at CMI. Don't forget to join the conversation by using the live chat box, and we'll answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A. I will now hand over to Catherine and Sarah to begin today's event.
Thanks, Craig. So welcome, everybody. This has been a very popular event. We've had over 1,100 of you. Oh, hi, Sarah. Yeah, we've had over 1,100 of you join. So thanks for taking the time out today. Welcome to the CMI Leadership Lessons from Horses and Sport event. So without further ado, I'd like to bring in our guest speakers, Dr. Jenny Uppal and Veronica Burke, and get them to introduce themselves. Hi, Jenny. Hi, Veronica. Hi. Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. So without further ado, let's just get you guys to introduce yourselves to the viewers, give a bit of your background, and talk about what your expertise and how it's influenced your leadership styles. So I'm going to go bottom left. So Veronica.
Hi.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. My background was originally in performance sport, but most of my career has been spent in executive education, so helping managers to accelerate their business contribution. I've worked with people who are early career professionals, but also with business leaders. I've worked internationally, and I've run large executive development programs to help people not only improve their business contribution, but be the best version of themselves at work and really enjoy their work. And for me, one of the most important influences in that has been personal development, which helps to connect, for me, what people know about business with what they actually do and how effective they are. So I'm hoping to speak a little bit more about personal development later on.
Excellent, thank you. Jenny.
Hi, so I'm Jenny Uppal. My background is in educational and child psychology, and working particularly with organisations, looking at systemic change, looking at effectiveness across the sectors, but also about kind of accommodating needs, diverse needs within organisations. More recently, I have taken on a role of equine facilitated psychotherapist, which means that I use horses in my work therapeutically. And I've set up an organisation called CEGR, which is the Centre for Emotional Growth and Resilience. And that uses horses to support leadership, team building, and well-being in organisations and with individuals as well. So my influences are looking at systems holistically, understanding how if we intervene at a particular point in a complex system, we can actually, even though it might be quite a modest intervention, we can have quite significant changes occurring throughout the system. And in particular, thinking about how as leaders and individuals, we can use our self-knowledge and develop our leadership styles to maximize change throughout the organization systemically.
Excellent, thank you. All right, thanks for introducing yourself. So let's kick off. So first of all, let's move into the main discussion. And So let's pose a question about self-awareness. So we know that self-awareness is really important. So in terms of leadership, how does your work help people to build that self-awareness? Jenny, do you want to take that first and then?
Yeah. So I'm going to talk obviously mainly about horses today, and with good reason, because one of the reasons why I love working with horses so much is because they offer great opportunity for us to learn about ourselves. And I'm talking personally here as well as professionally. I would say that horses have taught me an awful lot about leadership and really helped me to develop my own leadership style. And hopefully I'm going to be talking about that a bit more. I think the reason why they're so helpful is because they're firstly herd animals and they're social animals, and that equips them with a really uncanny ability to recognize what we bring into the space with them, the arena with them, and to reflect that back to us. So they can pick up on our feelings, they can pick up on our emotional states, they can pick up on our energetic states, they can pick up on our intentions. And I'll just talk a little bit about my own personal journey. I've got a picture, I think. So I wanted just to show you this picture of my horse Red, who has been a great teacher with regard particularly to leadership. He requires really authentic leadership. So if I am anxious, if I'm preoccupied, if I'm distracted, if I'm not in the moment with him, he won't follow me. I find it very, very difficult to get any kind of partnership with him. And in that respect, his needs within that moment are very similar to people. What he requires is that I come into the moment, that I am fully present, fully aware of what I'm bringing into the situation. So what he's demanding of me is a sense of confidence, trust. He wants to know that I'm a good leader. He wants to know that I'm the kind of leader he wants to follow. And if I'm not behaving in that way, so if I'm distracted, if I'm very anxious, if I'm angry, as we all get as leaders, he will demand that I come into the space with him. And when I become connected with him, so I take a step back, I look at myself, I understand that actually it's my anxiety that's creating his behavior. And when I can come into the present moment and reflect on that and do something different, so do something that's helpful in regulating what might otherwise be unhelpful experiences or feelings that I'm bringing into the space with him. It works like magic, and he will choose to follow me. But when I'm not doing that, he will constantly be pulling, trying to do his own thing. He's asking me, so who's leading today? Is it me that's leading today, or are you leading today? And I have to be constantly saying to him, no, it's okay. I'm leading today. I'm confident. I'm listening. I'm attuned to you. I'm leading today, and you can trust me to lead. And so he shines a light, particularly on my self-awareness. And in that respect, he and all horses are amazing partners in providing opportunities for us to reflect on ourselves. He acts as a mirror. So if he's being anxious, I know actually that that's something that I'm bringing into the space. And so he provides the opportunities in real embodied time. So it's a very embodied experience when you're working with horses. It's a very real-time experience of encouraging me to work out what's going on, manage and regulate those feelings, and actually do something that's a lot more helpful. And my experience of working in horses in that way, particularly with leaders, is that it's a really, really powerful experience for people in terms of helping them process what's happening for them in the moment, and then practice doing something else, because the response you get from him in particular, from Red, but from all horses, is very clear, direct and obvious. I would also say that horses have the capacity to offer very direct and non-critical, non-judgmental feedback. So whereas in other situations, if we're having to look at ourselves, there may be an element of defensiveness. We may feel criticized, we may feel vulnerable. I think it's much easier working with horses to accept that what they're providing for us is something that's very reflective and helpful. And I think that kind of reduces the risk that whoever I'm working with and myself is going to adopt a defensive position. So within our programs, and when I'm working with people, there's lots of opportunities to practice skills. And I would say that just to give you a flavour of some of the things that we do, it never ceases to amaze me when one of the activities might be for our participants to go and try and put a head collar on one of the ponies or one of the horses. And the only way the horses will allow that to happen is to, when the participants are feeling quite confident, clear, their communication is clear, they're feeling that they're confident in their intent. And I've seen situations where people have tried to approach the horses feeling perhaps nervous, anxious, doubtful about what it is they're trying to do. And the horses just walk away. Whereas when the participant is embodying good leadership qualities, like, they're clear about what it is they're trying to achieve, they feel a sense of confidence, they know what it is that they want the horse to do, then it's really quite miraculous sometimes that the horses will then just allow that process and will then participate. There's lots and lots of examples about how the work with horses can really help people think about themselves in leadership roles and support them to practice, highlight the difficulties or the barriers that they may experience in their own management or leadership position, and provide an opportunity for them to think about that and practice other techniques, other ways of being that might be more fruitful.
Super. Thanks, Jenny. That's really fantastic in-depth insight into how your work with horses can help sort of build self-awareness. So Veronica, from your experience, what does your sort of experience teach us about self-awareness and how important it is for leadership?
Well, I mean, for me, self-awareness is at the heart of good leadership. I mean, there are other attributes that are important in leadership as well. But, leadership starts with the self. And, it's what you do as a leader makes a huge difference. And that's true whether you're in a sports setting. You've got to lead yourself and be in control of yourself. And also, you need to understand what the impact of your behavior is on other people. And, I've asked people the question, how self-aware do you think you are? And it's an interesting question, because how do we develop a sense of how self-aware we really are and what our development gaps are? Not really just by our own perception is the answer. So a lot of my work is about encouraging people to seek feedback from others who work with them and for them at all different levels in their organizations in a structured way, to understand how other people see them as leaders, as their contribution in their businesses, because people tend to leave leaders, not organizations. So when there's a gap in my intent versus how my behavior is received, then there's a development gap there, a blind spot. And so a lot of personal development in leadership, trying to improve people's understanding of themselves and the impact that they have, is about uncovering development gaps, uncovering things that other people see that I don't really understand that I'm doing. And these things become much more significant the more senior that people become. So when you're just in a functional capacity, and you could apply this to a sports setting, when you're just on your own training, you're not perhaps having so much impact on other people as when you're working in an international sports team, for example. So the significance of blind spots become much more important the more senior you become. And also, added to that, it's much more difficult to get feedback the more senior you are. So if your boss says to you, how do you think I'm doing? It kind of depends what the relationship's like, whether you're going to get an honest answer. So in order to improve personal awareness, you've got to be interested in it, genuinely interested in it. And then you've got to, with the learning that you get, assuming it's useful for you, practice new ways of behaving that close those blind spots. So that, and then eventually those practice behaviors become part and parcel of how you are. But you have to start off with a quite deliberate practice of new behaviors. So this is not just about, it's not a theoretical exercise. It's very much like Jenny's saying with the horses. It's not a theoretical exercise. It's a practical exercise that, in order to extend learning, requires practice as well as knowledge.
Excellent, thank you. That's, it's interesting to see the sort of, the reflection of the self-awareness in terms of Jenny sort of being present and being in the moment, and Veronica in terms of, seeking feedback and actually understanding, being aware of what your gaps for development are. So it's interesting to see those parallels. So thank you. The next question I'd like to pose is if you can explain the distinction between learning and functional capability, and maybe Veronica, do you want to start that one off, please?
Yeah. In leadership development, if we want to become good leaders, we obviously need to know something about our business, how businesses work. We need to have some business acumen. We need to develop the capacity to think strategically. But there's also the action that goes with that. So a lot of coaching interventions, for example, or leadership development activities are about helping people to use their knowledge better. So I don't know if any of you have ever worked with anybody who knows a lot about leadership, but isn't a very effective leader. So in order to make the gap up, we need to actually do the things and use our knowledge well, not just know things about leadership. And for me, that connection is about developing a strong personal development agenda, which helps you to practice and use the knowledge that you have accumulated about leadership, and not just know lots of things. So for me, in order to be an effective leader, you need to know what you need to know. You need to have functional knowledge, but you also need to practice the capability to use that knowledge well, because a lot of problems in leadership communication and problems with leaders and leadership contribution comes from not being able to use knowledge very well. And perhaps not having a very good understanding of the impact that you have on other people, because leadership is it's about other people. Of course, it's about what you do, but it's an influencing function, which means that I've got to have really strong relationships up, across and down. And so leadership without relationships, for example, is not going to be very effective leadership. So I might know about the value of developing relationships, but if I actually don't have those relationships, I can't get very much done in my organization. So
excellent, thank you. So actually you're highlighting the gap between the textbook and the putting it into practice, and being able to, as we've been putting it into practice. So thank you. Jenny, would you like to sort of take that
I think one? Very similar to how Veronica's just described it. I think that obviously learning is about kind of a more abstract knowledge. It's a knowledge that we carry around. Functional capability is about actually how we put that into practice. And I think that one of the things that often gets in the way is our unconsciousness. So I think as a race, we tend to have quite a lot of unconsciousness about what we communicate and how we behave. So I think it's, I've heard quoted lots of different things. I think very often 80%, but I haven't actually verified that. But, you know, I've heard it said that 80% of what we communicate and how we behave is actually not conscious to us, so that the people around us, our colleagues, our spouses, our pets, will know much more about our behavior and about what we're giving out and about our internal states than we're actually conscious of in the moment. So I think, you know, like Veronica's mentioned, a lot of it is about being very honest and very aware about ourselves, and really trying to cultivate a mindset which seeks to look at things that may be sometimes quite difficult to look at. So I would say that a large part of being unconscious is actually an emotional defense. For lots of different reasons, we develop psychological defenses, and they're often the parts of our behavior which are quite difficult for us to think about and look at. So I think, as well as self-awareness and an intent to actually look at ourselves quite critically, but also with compassion, you know, it takes courage too. And often it takes to be really authentic and really understanding what we're bringing into a situation and the difference between our learning and actually the way we behave, you know, our functional capability. I think it takes a lot of courage.
And I guess that's harks back to originally what you said about horses will very much play that back to us. If we're coming into something feeling, they will reflect out, they will pick up on our unconscious elements, that, you know, the 80% that we're bringing to the situation.
For sure. I mean, just to add to that, you know, with my best teacher, Red, my horse, you know, I spent a lot of time when I first had him, and he was very wild and quite scary. He wouldn't do as I asked him to do, and no amount of bullying, cajoling, or bribery would get him on side, working alongside me. And I was full of ideas about what was going on, but for a long time I was actually quite unconscious about the fact that what he was responding to was me. So he was responding to my anxiety, he was responding to my frustration, he was responding to my blind spots. And so I think that's just an illustration of how helpful it can be working with horses, and you know, how they can really support us to look deeply. And it was actually only by really getting vulnerable and really being quite honest about myself that I was actually able to move forward and become a better leader. And I would say also that it's an ongoing journey. You know, it's we never really arrive there.
It's not once and done, right? Thank you. Super. So the next thing I'd like to discuss with you guys is what's the significance of emotional regulation in leadership, and how can one prevent losing control of their emotions, considering the role of cortisol? And maybe, Veronica, do you want to take that with your sort of sporting slant on things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd probably start with a sporting example. If we were to think about watching the Lionesses perform recently, arguably there was a number of decisions there that could have brought about quite a strong emotional reaction. And actually, of course, there was some disagreement, as there always is, perhaps with some of the decisions that were made. But what I noticed about that particular example, which is a good example in terms of what we're talking about, is that objections were able to be made, but that didn't interfere with the performance of the team. And that's a very important lesson for leadership generally. So what we want to avoid is having what they call is an amygdala hijack. So when we have a strong emotional reaction to something, our amygdala, which is the part of the brain that basically runs emotion, takes over. So it's a fight or flight reaction. And when that happens, we become emotional, not rational. And actually, that didn't happen to people on the Lionesses team, which is entirely appropriate. So when we become emotional, we're not able to express our views in a rational way, which is not helpful in leadership. And it's not helpful on the sports field either. That doesn't mean that we should take emotion out of business or out of sport. It means that we should express our emotions, but not become emotional. Because if we become emotional, we'll lose control of the kind of communication that would perhaps enable us to object properly to what we want to object to. So when the amygdala takes over, actually we get a rush of cortisol and adrenaline to help us with that fight or flight reaction. And that's entirely normal. We're not supposed to stay in that state for a long time, but it takes some time for those levels to go down, for us to become rational, for the amygdala to be reassured that everything is okay, and for us to return to a rational state. So the trick is to find ways to express strong emotions, to say you're angry about something or upset about something, but not to join up what you're saying with becoming irrational or upset, unless you don't expect to be able to actually communicate rationally. And actually, generally speaking, business, that's not terribly helpful. And true, the same is true for sport as well. So there might be times when, of course, that you will become very emotional, but recognize that those are not the times to try and move decisions forward or to get outcomes that you really want, because you won't be able to think through things in perhaps the same way as you would be able to if you were in a rational state.
Excellent. So it's effectively feel the emotion, but maybe as a leader, that's not, when you're in the midst of an emotional response, that's not the time to be communicating messages to you until you're sort of calm and able to articulate yourself clearly.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with expressing that you're unhappy or upset about something. But if you become upset and unhappy, then recognize that that's probably not the best time to be having a rational conversation. Excellent. It's a bit like when you get annoyed and you press the email button. I'm just going to tell that person, and then you like later, oh, I'm sure I should have done that.
Excellent, thank you. So Jenny, what's your feeling on this?
Yeah, very, very similar again. I mean, I think that often our emotions will hijack our behaviour when we're not conscious of them. So it comes kind of full circle again. I mean, this is a reoccurring theme, isn't it? As Veronica said, self-awareness is actually the foundation for good leadership and for good connecting, good communication. So being aware of how we feel is really, really important. And I think the more we can be aware about ourselves, the less likely we are to then be hijacked by our feelings. And going back to the point I made previously about one of the challenges that we have as human beings are that, you know, many of our emotions and our triggers are actually quite unconscious to us. For good reasons. I don't know that we've got time to go into it here unless anyone wants to, but I think that so what we need to do is become increasingly aware of our own triggers. So, very often those kinds of very heightened emotional responses are about triggers that actually may belong to a different time. They might not be actually, they might not be entirely about what's happening in the moment. So it's quite important for us to, like Veronica said, actually just pause, think about coming into the present. I think a strategy that is really important is about coming into the present, because I think it's the point of power. We can only actually have power over our present moment. So by pausing, coming into the moment, we connect with the power that we have in the moment to make decisions and do something differently. So I also think that, just thinking about how we support other people, what we know is that when we are understood, when people feel understood, seen and heard, it acts as a circuit breaker, and to the parasympathetic nervous system, which actually takes us into fight or flight and helps us kind of feel very overwhelmed. So I just think it's an important point to think about as a leader and for ourselves. How can we create some circuit breakers for ourselves which actually help us to come into the present moment, be more conscious and more thoughtful about how we respond to any particular kind of challenge that triggers us in that way. Yeah. And
I guess that will be specific to individuals, and that's about them understanding what actions they could take to bring themselves back into the present, to sort of take themselves out of that fight or flight emotional response.
Yeah, but I think one of the points perhaps I wanted to make was about, as a leader, you also have a way of supporting your colleagues by simply listening, being present with them, listening, hearing, understanding what's happening to them, can support your colleagues as well. And that can act as a really powerful circuit breaker to people around you who might be feeling dysregulated.
So it's about learning about your own circuit breakers, but also what you can do for others as well to help others in your team.
And that personal connection, and how very, very important that is to our emotional regulation.
Excellent. Could I just add to that? Absolutely agree with you, Jenny. And I think the other thing that you just made me think about then was when these hotspots are breached, the things that are sensitive for us, and most of us have them, which are, as Jenny says, not to do with necessarily what's going on in the present, but something that's happened in the past. If the hotspot is kind of pressed, we can go much more quickly into an amygdala hijack than we would otherwise do. And people also have individual ways in which they respond to situations that they see as emotional. So some people go very slowly into an amygdala hijack. So it's like very gradual. And then you just take the lid off and then you wonder why they've reacted like they have. And other people go very quickly into amygdala hijack. So it's like 0 to 100. And some people never had one. They never got that emotional because they're not really sure about what they feel. And in fact, I asked a good colleague of mine once, how do you feel about this situation? He said, I don't know. I've got to think about it. So people's emotions are closer or distant to them in terms of that kind of hotspot. So, if I have a particular sensitivity about something, and so it's worth thinking individually what it is that, might make you more sensitive and how quickly or slowly you might go into what we call an amygdala hijack.
And I guess that's, again, potentially something that I think Jenny's mentioned that, might be quite difficult if this is something that's unconscious for us. We may or may not know what our triggers are or what. So I guess that's sort of some work that we can do in the background to understand what might be a trigger point for us. Okay, super. Thank you. Next question is, I mean, it's a this is a big question, but what traits and qualities define an effective leader? So Jenny, what do you think?
Okay.
$1 million question.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about, self-awareness, and it's got to be there. It's central to being an effective leader. If you're not aware of how you connect with people, how you behave, what you're feeling, what energy you're bringing in, then I would really argue that it's pretty difficult to be an effective leader. You can be a leader, and I know lots of leaders who do operate without self-awareness, but I would argue that you can't be an effective leader without self-awareness. I think that it's really important to think about how, what people want from a leader. And I think generally people want to feel safe. They want to feel understood. Like I've said, the same as the horses tell us very, very directly that they want to be understood, they want to be heard, and they want to be seen. And when you can convey all of those things, then you have horses that will happily follow you through any situation. And I would say that, to sum that up, the trust, trust is the word that comes to mind, really. And people are the same. I think what we want as leaders is we want people to trust us so that they choose to follow us. And I think that people are looking for leaders. So people often want that they want to feel that the leader that they have got is somebody who's trustworthy, confident, and is going to lead them in a good way into a good space. So I would just add to that as well as that self-awareness, knowing yourself, knowing how you operate, I think that it's really important to be able to connect with the present moment. And I think that this is a particular challenge for everybody in our current culture, where we're very distracted. There are so many distractions. People are so very, very full of information, overwhelmed by information, overwhelmed by stresses and pressures. And I think probably like never before, there's a real challenge in it being able to put that to one side and just come into the present moment and to connect with what's happening for you in the current moment, your current environment, and the people around you. And I would also argue that actually, if you're not able to do that, it means that you would find it very difficult to connect with effectively with the people around you, because if you can't be present and you're thinking about whatever it might be, 1,000,001 things for most of us, it's impossible to really connect authentically with the people around you. And people like horses are absolutely aware of when you're present with them or when you're not. And I think that when people feel that their leader is present and with them, then that inevitably is going to engender trust. So to sum up, I would say, self-awareness, ability to come into the present, to be connected with the people around you and your environment, and really effective interpersonal skills and communication.
Cool. Well, thank you. That nailed it. So before I come to you, Veronica, I've just We did do an event previously on followers and followership, which actually links quite nicely to what Jenny said. So if anybody is watching who didn't watch that webinar, that will be available on our various channels and in the archive. So feel free to sort of watch that and explore the concept of followership, which obviously Jenny sort of alluded to there. So Veronica, traits and qualities for an effective leader.
There's so much I could say about this. I've started to write some notes. I guess because leadership is essentially an influencing process, and it's about relationships. It's about other things as well, of course. You know, we have to be good at influencing people at all levels, and absolutely agree with Jenny that it's about people wanting to follow us. It's not about trying to, you know, punish people or make people do things. And ultimately, we're trying to get people's commitment to do things that they might otherwise prefer not to do, quite honestly. And we don't want their compliance. We want their commitment. And a lot of leadership issues that I've seen are about the compliance versus commitment problem, where people nod, but actually they're not committed to what you're saying, because there is a million ways in which people can get out of doing things that they'd otherwise prefer not to do, absolutely legitimately. So the self-awareness piece we've spoken about, and I absolutely agree. That's very, very important. I think good leaders are also coaches. So they are other-centered people who ask good questions and don't always advocate, but they ask lots of good questions. So they understand what's actually going on for people individually, and that they can respond to their concerns, which is kind of actually slightly overlapping with a question that's going to come a little bit later. I think it's also important that good leaders have business acumen. They need to be able to think strategically and ask good strategic questions. And that doesn't mean that they need to know everything. And that is a real block for people who think that when they get to be senior leaders, they need to know everything. They absolutely don't need to know everything. They need to know what the good questions are to ask, and they need to have good relationships so that they can talk to people who work in the functions of the business to find out what the strategic problems are and how we're going to move the organisation forward. So if you haven't got colleagues who talk to you about those things because you're not very good interpersonally, then you're not going to be a very good leader. So it's not really about knowing. It's letting go of needing to know everything, but understanding that you need to ask good questions. And I'd say one other thing that's important is learn how to be constructive in the way that you use organizational politics, because politics with a small p is there. And there's nothing wrong with seeking and using power responsibly as a leader. In fact, you need power to be able to do the things you want to do. And to enable your organization to move forward strategically. So that's very important. And there's not enough time to talk about that now, but you can look at French and Raven's taxonomy of power. And obviously there's formal sorts of power, but there's also informal power. And that's very important for leaders to seek and use well. And that's all about relationships.
That would be, if we could, we'll get that circulated to the viewers after the event. So we'll so people know, we'll send that round. Just making a note of that so I don't forget. Thanks, Veronica. So we've got one more question, then we'll move into the pre-submitted questions and some live questions. So let's think about what strategies can leaders employ to maintain their resilience, and what resources or methods are available for supporting that? So Jenny, as leaders, what can we do? What strategies can we employ to maintain our own resilience?
Yeah, obviously self-awareness, developing ways that we can be self-aware. I would say, really developing some healthy mindfulness habits, which is all about, helping us to connect with the present moment, bring things into perspective, but also helping clarity. So we know that mindfulness practices help us think clearly. In terms of resilience and self-care, the two are really connected. And I think that something perhaps we haven't talked very much about and perhaps should have done is boundaries. So I think for leaders, thinking about the boundaries is a really important aspect of leadership. And you know, we all know what a struggle it is to maintain healthy boundaries so that we actually don't take on too much, so that we kind of create clear relationships with people, with our colleagues, so that we don't start overstepping the mark and taking responsibilities that actually we don't need to burden ourselves with, because as leaders, we've probably already got quite a lot to cope with already. So I think really being, you know, mindful, conscious of boundaries, conscious of what you take on is very important, and making sure that there's a real balance in your life. And again, you know, I don't say these things lightly. I understand that particularly for leaders, that's a big one. It's a big challenge. Just a couple more things I would say. Coaching and mentoring is really important as well, so that you're getting some feedback from somebody who can be very honest, somebody who you can trust, that has your best interest at heart, so that you can receive what they say, you know, really constructively.
Excellent. Yeah, I guess it's, so the boundaries is for leaders, it is a very difficult thing to put boundaries in around time and challenging demands and conflicting demands. But I guess it's how we as leaders need to work out how we create those boundaries and kind of adhere to them and manage them. Yeah. So
can I just say one more thing about that, Kat? Because I think it's about the concept of actually not putting, we all know leaders who have got very, very tight boundaries and they're virtually out of reach. And we know other leaders who are actually completely overwhelmed because they take on so much of what's going on from other people. And I think it really is thinking about that kind of permeable boundary that protects you but doesn't defend you against, you know, the outside world.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. And then Veronica.
For me, in leadership, resilience is about being able to bounce back from difficult situations, to learn well from things that go wrong and not be completely derailed by them. So obviously having strong relationships around us, I don't just mean at work, but, you know, people who will say, just put that in its place. You know, it's not all encompassing. They help you get things into perspective. So have you got good friends, people you can talk about things with that you find perhaps difficult? Another technique is to have lots of boxes. So not just to have one great big work box and no other real, you know, lots of other small boxes, but to try and balance out the different aspects of your life. So the work of Martin Seligman, who's done a lot of work on happiness, talks about having a full life, a purposeful life that has many other dimensions to it. So if we put all our eggs in one basket and have a huge business box and something goes wrong at work, then that's likely to have a much more significant effect than if we can say, well, that's just one box and I've got good friends over here and I can put it in perspective. The other thing is that, and this is definitely taking some parallels with sport, is to have mechanisms, good coping mechanisms, but also mechanisms to reach goals. So rather than just having a goal that perhaps something goes wrong and then you can't reach that goal, is to derive mechanisms and systems of achieving your goals. So your goal is broken down into a number of mechanisms of things that you do every day that enable you to reach your goal. And then if something goes wrong with one of the mechanisms, then you correct the mechanism rather than thinking that everything is lost because you can't reach your goal. And actually, the work of James Clear, who's written a book called Atomic Habits, is all about the habits that you develop to achieve goals. And it's for me, a very strong empirically based book that helps people to think about what they need to do to achieve their goals and break down goals into mechanisms rather than just ends in and of themselves.
Super. Thanks both. That's really helpful. So, Sarah, let's move over to you and some of the pre-submitted or live questions.
Oh, thank you. So a question from Becky here, pre-submitted one, was how do you balance team, individual staff needs with organisation needs that are often driven by outside forces you don't necessarily agree with? And also, how do you maintain your integrity when you're doing that? So maybe if I come to Jenny first.
I I think the first thing that comes to mind is the need to listen. So, connect with your colleagues and listen to what they're saying. You don't have to agree. You don't have to empathise. You don't have to agree. But what we know is that when people feel understood and heard, that's a really powerful. That's a very powerful experience for people in being able to help them adapt to things that they might not agree with. And there's always going to be, real life things that we have to do that we don't really want to do, but actually feeling heard and feeling that and knowing that our feelings have been taken into account is actually a really, I think it's very undervalued. It's much underestimated how powerful that very simple act of listening can be. I would say that's got to be at the forefront of how you balance, individual versus organisational needs.
Fab, thank you. Anything you wanted to add, Veronica?
Yes, I mean, I think absolutely agree with Jenny. I think as leaders, we sometimes get caught in between the organisation and what we perhaps want to do ourselves. And that's kind of what it's like working for organisations sometimes. I'd like to borrow something from the world of sport, which is control the controllables. So there are some things which are outside of our control. We have to implement a decision. We might not agree with it. And there's other things that we can influence. So controlling the controllables, being clear about what is non-negotiable, whilst also listening and appreciating other people's views, just as Jenny said. And also, if we have to communicate a difficult decision, to also explain the rationale behind it. Because sometimes, whether or not I agree with the decision that you just delivered to me, if I can understand why you made that decision, it makes it somewhat easier. And the other thing I'd say is that it's not worth putting 100% effort into trying to control something or influence something if you're only going to get 5% of a result out of it. So adjust the amount of effort that you're actually going to put into influencing a situation against what you think you can gain from the outcome, because some relationships are never going to be 100%. That's fine. If you can improve them by 5% and you can live with that, then put 5% of effort into improving them.
Excellent, thank you. And a couple of questions we've had coming in on the chat. So one from Paul was asking about a topic of amygdala hijacks. What are your tips if you find yourself in the moment suffering from an amygdala hijack? What's your tips for dealing with that situation? And maybe we'll go to Veronica first, that one.
Okay, so what we know about amygdala hijacks is they don't go away quickly, straight away, because the amygdala needs to be reassured that actually all is well. So the best thing to do is to not engage, is to try and take yourself out of the situation. Perhaps say, look, I'd love to discuss this with you in more detail, but I just need to get a cup of coffee, or I've just got to take a call, until you actually can feel that you've gone back into a rational state. So put some kind of pause technique in, trying not to discuss the important thing that you really feel strongly about when you're in an amygdala hijack. And if you want a bit more information about it, Dr. Steve Peters has written a book called The Chimp Paradox, which is all about the amygdala hijack.
Fab, thank you. Anything else, Jenny, from your experience?
No, I agree with what Veronica said. Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that, really.
Cool. Fab. Thank you. So a question from Sean then. So much has been discussed about avoiding negative emotions in effective leadership interactions. How about positive emotions? So how about sort of bringing joy, humour, etc. into those interactions? Should we go to Jenny first?
Yeah, I mean, I would perhaps just reframe that, because I don't believe that we should be avoiding negative emotions in effective leadership interaction. I think that we should, it's really important to own negative emotions. I think they provide lots of really important information that we can't afford to just ignore or avoid. And I think that when we try and avoid negative emotions, then we get ourselves into all kinds of difficulty. So I think being aware of them actually is really important, and somehow being able to process them is really important. But of course, yeah, I'm a great believer in balance. I think there's a lot of research, a lot of evidence to say that actually we need to encompass both the positive and the negative emotions to create balanced, effective leadership. So yeah, by all means, joy, humour, of course, is really important. It's one of the things that makes us human. But yeah, don't ignore the negative emotions as well.
Oh, thank you. And Veronica.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'd absolutely agree with what Jenny's saying. In fact, a lot of problems in leadership are caused by unacknowledged negative emotions. And interestingly, the role of humour is a major part of emotional intelligence, which is definitely something that is right front and centre of what we've been talking about. And for me, leadership development is about helping people be the best versions of themselves as leaders. And that's a very individual thing. There's no blueprint for how you should be as a leader. But what I found is that when people move away from the function, to become leaders is quite scary. But actually, when they start to develop other people, that's a very positive thing. To be able to coach somebody and develop them and enable them to be a fabulous leader actually renders huge amounts of satisfaction for people that they didn't really know that they would have when they moved a little bit more away from their individual function and became more of a generalist rather than a specialist.
Brilliant. Well, I'm conscious of our time, so I think I'm going to hand back over to Catherine now just to wrap up.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a really interesting debate, and your inputs have been really thought-provoking. So, and obviously what we like to try and do is to help our viewers take away some actionable tips. So if we just come to each of you to give us your sort of 3 key takeaways that people can take away and implement in their sort of day-to-day lives. So Jenny, do you want to come to us first with your 3 tips to take away?
Yeah, so is that 3 tips for effective leadership?
Yeah, what can people take away to sort of implement in their daily lives to?
Yeah, self-awareness, of course. Really learning how to use the present moment. I can't stress that enough, and I would kind of refer you to somebody like Eckhart Tolle. There's lots of mindfulness apps, meditation, really important, and connecting with others. Make sure that we're present when we're connecting with others, and that we do that in the present moment, because that's how we get fulfillment for ourselves and for those around us as well.
Super, thank you. Veronica, your 3 top tips or key takeaways?
Okay, so develop an explicit and ambitious personal development agenda, and hold yourself accountable to not just yourself. Because we can't guarantee as leaders that people will, in our organisations, our bosses and our colleagues will look after our development. We have to do that for ourselves and get in the habit of reviewing that regularly. So you need to be able to measure it, by the way. Secondly, something we haven't touched on yet, but it's a really quick win from the world of sport: hydrate for concentration. So what we know is that if we become dehydrated, our concentration and focus capacity drops. You can actually measure it, so you can have a little look around that. But maintaining really good hydration will enable us to concentrate and focus much better. And finally, control the controllables. So adjust the amount of effort for the amount of outcome you're likely to get. Excellent, super, brilliant actionable tips. So thank you very much both. Thanks for your time, and thanks for everyone who's been viewing. So we'll just hand over to Mary. Oh, Craig even. Sorry, Craig.
That's okay. Thank you, Catherine. So yes, that is everything for today's session. I just want to say thank you again to our hosts, Catherine and Sarah, and also to our speakers, Jenny and Veronica for your insight and expertise. Please stay tuned to hear more about CMI membership, and thank you again for joining us.
Don't forget, as a CMI member, you can find the latest management and leadership insights at managers.org.uk. If you're not yet a member, join our community to discover CMI Confidence with on-demand resources, our network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations.